Hey guys, I'm Will from Tested.
And I'm Norm from Tested.
Norman Chan, iPhones.
Double iPhone.
What does it mean? It means that there's two big iPhones that just came out a couple weeks ago.
This is the biggest iPhone release, and I hate the pun. I'm sorry. Let me start that over. This is the most significant change to the iPhone family of phones from Apple in a long time.
I mean, if you remember a couple years ago when the 5S, which now looks positively dainty in comparison, came out, everybody was like, oh my God, iPhone, it's getting so big. This tall screen, it's ridiculous. People are crazy. They've blown that out of the water with this one. These are really big phones. The thing at the top of Apple's page says bigger is bigger, I think.
Bigger is bigger.
I don't know what that means.
That's a really lame tagline. I think it was like better than bigger.
I think they could say big is the new small, or black is blue, or I don't know. I'm not a marketing person, clearly.
Sell me on these phones.
So I have been using the 6 Plus for the last about 2 weeks. Coincidentally, the return period is 14 days now with new iPhones. So we're shooting this before the end of the return period. Because I'm not sure if I'm going to keep the Plus yet. I've been using it for, like I said, 2 weeks. I have my wife's iPhone 6 here beside it. I've used it a little bit. I haven't done any in-depth battery testing or something like that because it's her phone. I don't want to take it away from her. But we can run down the speeds and feeds up front if you want. The big thing is that this is a 5.5-inch screen. This is a 5.7, 4.7, something like that inch screen.
Something like that.
It's less big. It feels puny in comparison. And once you've been carrying this guy for a couple of weeks, picking up a 5S feels like a toy. It feels like a little itsy bitsy phone for babies. The weight difference is immediately noticeable. The 6 feels very light. It's a little bit lighter than the 5S. The 7 Plus is 172 grams. The 6 is 129 grams, and the 5S is 112 grams. So it's like baby bear, mama bear, papa bear. The thing that I was surprised about was that the size didn't actually make that much of a difference in the day-to-day, like how I carry the phone. It's awesome when I'm in the house. The larger screen with higher resolution allows you to do some different stuff that we'll talk about in a little bit. But just carrying it around the house when I'm on the couch or laying in bed or whatever, it felt really good. It felt somewhere in between what I was accustomed to from a phone and using an iPad, right? So I found I was using this much more than my iPad mini, which I wasn't expecting, really.
Okay.
You look skeptical at this point.
Oh, no.
Chan.
I mean, I've been using big phones for a while, and it's very novel to see the adoption of new big phones.
Okay.
So it's good. It's good that you like the 5.5-inch phone.
So the place that it kind of breaks down for me is when I'm walking around on the street. I feel super self-conscious and weird busting this big boy out of my pocket, and I feel like I'm going to drop it all the time if I'm walking and using it and have headphones and stuff plugged in, because it doesn't hold well. And a lot of the stuff that you're kind of accustomed to doing on iOS with one hand doesn't work well. For example, I can't reach the camera shortcut on the right side of the screen with one hand if I'm just holding the phone. I always have to do the second hand to get it to come up. That was the big adjustment for me, and it means that everything's two-handed. It means that using your phone at a stoplight suddenly got much more dangerous and involved than it ever was before, which is not, you shouldn't use your phone at stoplights, but if you do, you're not going to use this phone at stoplights. Didn't have any bending. This table isn't exactly flat, but when I placed it on a flat surface, there's no wobbling. Mm-hmm. This is the 6 Plus. I didn't carry the 6 in my pocket as much as I did the 6 Plus, but no problems with that so far. From reports that we've heard, Apple said that they had, I think, 9 complaints about bet iPhones.
Sure. So
that seems like it was maybe blown out of proportion.
Absolutely. Please don't go to an Apple store and try betting the phones. That's a real dick move.
They frown on that. I wouldn't put it in my back pocket still. I don't carry electronics in my back pocket. It seems like a good, because I'll mainly because of my I'm absent-minded and I will forget and sit down on it and break it. I would expect it to break if I sit down on something. I don't know how you feel about sitting on electronics.
I always take the phone out of my pocket, back pocket, before I sit down.
Right, and you're obsessive enough about it that you're not going to do it by accident.
Sure.
Where I don't trust myself to do that. The screen on both of these phones feels a little bit closer to the surface than the 5S. I wasn't able to actually see, I didn't get out the dissecting microscope to look, but it feels, I don't know, you take a look and see what you think. It seems like it's less recessed than on the 5S, which I thought was a good thing.
Just looking at it, I can't tell.
Right.
I can't tell the difference between the 5S and the 6.
I think it's because of the curve of the screen.
Okay,
more
so
than
explain
anything.
the curve of the screen.
So the glass on the edge of the screen, you can barely see it in this shot, but there's a little bit of a bulge. It's like a bubble top almost on it. It's if you think about like a lapel pin that has that acrylic on the top, the resin on the top, it kind of almost looks like that. So there's just a gentle curve across the top, and
Across the whole top?
across it's beveled up and then flat and then beveled down.
Okay, so just on the edge.
Just on the edges, but it goes fairly far into the edges, so you don't really feel glass when you're holding it like this, which is a little bit weird. I miss the square edge of the iPhone 5 and 4 that you can just put it up on its edge and hold it flat, even on the button side.
And that was useful for things like FaceTime.
FaceTime with the kid, taking time-lapse photos, stuff like that. You know, iOS 8 has this new time-lapse camera feature. It's completely useless because there's no way to prop the phone up on the round edges. It just doesn't
Unless you
work.
buy a case or something.
You need to buy
mount
a
it.
glyph or something like that. A glyph for iPhone 6, which isn't out yet. The screen's great for reading. Like in the Kindle app, it's basically paperback size, which I find really good. They actually just updated the app yesterday, so now it's using the new kind of Chrome resolution instead of the old Chrome resolution scaled up. So I actually need to bump the font size up a notch or two. It was the smallest size on the thing that I found is on legacy apps that haven't been updated yet. The smallest font rendering you can find works well with the 6 Plus's scaled up resolution.
Can you show an
Otherwise,
illustration
it's
of
too
that?
big. Yeah. So Tweetbot is the perfect example of that. It's an app that hasn't been updated yet. So here we are. This is the default smallest resolution for fonts on the OS. On the 6 Plus, and I'm going to put it on the system size, which is the default setting, and everything's enormous.
Right.
Oh my God! So basically, what this is doing is saying, okay, you have a 5S, we're going to scale it way up to fit on the higher resolution 1920 by 1080 screen on the 6 Plus. It's less of an issue on the 6. I can show you the same thing there. So this is the default resolution. This is Gina's Twitter account. I apologize in advance, Gina. And then I'm going to make it as small as I can. And you don't notice the difference as much. So the legacy apps, like one of the things that I've noticed about this phone, it's good for video. Like the larger screen size is great for watching video, laying in bed or something like that. If you put a pair of headphones on, especially. The Apple apps have all been updated, or the ones that you use most frequently have been updated, but a lot of the third-party apps haven't yet. So on the 6, there's no kind of landscape view. Just like there's never been a landscape view for iOS,
But
for
now there
iPhone
is.
before. On the 6 Plus, when you rotate to the side, you get landscape view in most of the default apps.
So
I'll show you
iOS
again.
8 has landscape view for the 6 Plus, you don't get that at all for the 6?
Doesn't happen in the 6.
Ah, okay.
So the extra resolution, the 6 is a 720p screen. Basically, it's 1334 by 750 pixels. The 6 Plus is 1920 by 1080. The extra pixels they're actually using to show you more data on the 6 Plus. So the bigger screen does get you something, which is kind of nice. So here's the Messages app. You'll get to see deep into my text messages. This is what you get. You get this side-scrolling thing when you're in landscape mode. When you're in portrait, it looks just like it does on the 5. There's just more space vertically and
Kind of what the
horizontally.
iPad does.
Kind of very similar to what the iPad does, actually. Same thing for Mail. So here's the Mail app. This should be our podcast folder. It resets after a while. So okay, so here's the podcast email. You can see, same thing. There's a list of messages, the overall thing. If you go into calendars, it's a little bit different there. So this is the normal, let's go to today, and I'll go to the, I don't remember how to do the daily view. Oh, wow, that's not what I wanted. I guess that's the new daily view. I usually use a different calendar, so I'm not the expert on calendars. When you are in a day, then it'll give you the day calendar list and then an individual event over here on the right. Here we go. So like here's the shooting day, and then here's the individual entry or whatever. So
That's good.
They're using the additional resolution and space well. The problem is that none of the third-party apps really support that yet. Even the stuff that actually supports the new rendering windows for iOS 8.
Now, can you explain what the rendering is? Because it's not actually rendering the phone at that resolution, at the 1920 by 1080.
Yeah, so it's actually rendering at a higher resolution. It's like 2048 by 1536 or something like that. I can't remember. It's a higher resolution, scaling it down a little bit. That actually introduces some performance issues. John Gruber pointed this one out. You don't actually see it that often, but when you're in things that involve horizontal scrolling, I don't have enough tabs open. Hold on, let's open a bunch of tabs.
Okay.
When you have a bunch of tabs open, you see kind of a weird scrolling effect that's not ideal. I didn't find it particularly offensive, nor do I even notice it very much. But when you go back and do the same thing on the 6, then you notice. See, there's a little, just a little tiny hitch there.
What about the readability and in terms of the text on the screen, since it's being technically downsampled for that resolution?
I haven't noticed, like there's a, on websites that are, what do you call it, optimized for Retina displays, when they have the higher resolution images, you don't notice as much. When you look at like Logitech's website here, probably go to the full screen. Yeah. So when we look at the Logitech logo up here, I don't think that's a high-res image. You can see it's just a little soft around the edges.
Okay. But text rendering is all sharp and it looks, aliasing is good?
The problem is images. Aliasing on text isn't a problem. I can show you another website here that's more text-heavy. For example, Hacker News is good. So the text is super sharp. The interesting thing about this higher resolution display is it's a higher pixel density on the 6 Plus than the 6, in addition to being a higher resolution. I think it's 401 pixels per inch. Normally I can take my glasses off and use my nearsighted superpowers to see pixels on pretty much any display. I can't see them on this one.
And these are still both LCD displays.
These are still both LCD displays. When Ray Sonora did his testing at DisplayMate, he basically rated these the best phone displays he's tested. The only knock he gave was for the 6, because it's a lower resolution. He feels like 720p-ish isn't high enough resolution for a modern smartphone.
Okay.
So that's the screen stuff. Like the other big thing that changes on legacy apps that's worth mentioning is keyboard on legacy apps is enormous. So this is my Apple stock keyboard on a legacy app. I'm going to go over to Safari and show you the same keyboard not on a legacy app.
So the keyboards are not OS native, they are app native.
Well, you can have, the keyboard's rendered the same way it would be on the device it's being mimicked. So if this is designed for this screen, it takes up about a third of the screen, maybe a quarter. When I switch back over to Tweetbot, you'll see it's almost half. Right. It's an enormous keyboard. The app can choose some things about how it displays, like it can choose to display this extra word bar at the top. That seems to come and go based on whether the developer wants it. You can even scroll it up and down, like squinch it up and down if you want.
Now what about custom keyboards?
Custom keyboards are an iOS 8 feature, so they work on everything, not just the 6 and the 6 Plus. I actually have SwiftKey installed here, in addition to an emoji keyboard. And SwiftKey lets you do things like, I can type the message.
Right. And swapping between them is just a matter of maybe just like choosing a language on your.
It's the same as switching between the normal keyboard and the emoji keyboard, if that's a thing that you do. The one thing I noticed immediately is that Apple doesn't allow an API for voice entry on third-party keyboards. So if the third-party keyboard doesn't have its own voice entry support, there's not going to be an option to hit the microphone and talk into the phone.
Which is a very useful feature.
It's very good. It's mostly when you're doing things you shouldn't do, like driving and texting at the same time.
Sure.
So I think that the distinction between iPad and iPhone apps is going to disappear. Like the universal iPad, iPhone, like right now there's basically 3 classes of apps in iOS. Phone-only apps, iPad-only apps, apps that work universally across phone and iPad. I think that's probably going to erode over the next, say, year and a half.
See more of the third type.
I think it'll just be iOS apps that work on these devices, and there won't be distinct views. I think the distinction will be sub 6 Plus screen size, greater than 6 Plus screen size.
Okay.
And just based on the way the OS is handling rendering different apps.
What else is notable about the 6 Plus and the 6?
The cameras are new. So it's an 8 megapixel camera. It's f2.2, f-stop 2.2 aperture. It takes nice pictures. I think
better pictures than the 5S.
It seems like better pictures than the 5S. I did some highly scientific testing where I got out in the backyard and took pictures. Let me find my folder here. I took pictures with all 3 cameras rubber banded together.
Okay.
So this rose picture, and we'll have the other 3 up as well. You can see, like when you zoom in, then you can see fine detail. It's optically stabilized on the 6 Plus. It's not optically stabilized on the 6. I wasn't able to tell any significant difference between the two. Maybe a little bit of a difference when you're doing video where you're like walking around and bouncing.
Do you have an example of that?
I do. You could see a little, like I said, a little bit of a difference, but it didn't seem to be.
So, for example, if I'm walking down the street and just holding the phone up, as some people do.
That's what I did to test this.
And is that noticeably different than the 5S or the 6 in terms of the shakiness?
A little tiny bit better. You'll notice it side by side. I think if you looked at one and then the other, you probably wouldn't notice it at all.
Okay.
So low light performance seemed quite good compared to previous versions. If you look at this picture, this is a dark room. You would never actually know it looking at the picture. She's just sitting, like there's no overhead lights on. The only ambient light in the room comes from a window
it looks like
off
a
to the left
day.
shoulder. Right. The other thing that it's much better at is automatically adjusting for HDR. So like this spot on the lower left-hand corner of the screen where the sun is reflecting off the floor would be completely blown out with prior to iOS 8 cameras. This is again an iOS 8 feature, not the automatically shooting HDR and a normal gamut photo at the same time is a new iOS 8 feature, not necessarily an iPhone 6 or 6 Plus feature.
Okay.
The only other feature that's new is the high-speed camera.
Yeah.
So we've seen this. It's me blowing a raspberry.
Yep. That's what frames per second?
This is 240 frames a second.
And that's at, oh, there goes flickering. That's something you get.
So one of the things you notice is because 240 is a multiple of 60, which is what our electricity runs at here, you see the flickering on the lights much more, especially with incandescent bulbs and fluorescent bulbs. Halogen seems to be less of an issue, and LED, I think, flickers at a higher frame rate.
And this is at 720p.
So this is at 720p, 240 frames per second. I actually managed to get a hummingbird. So I'm going to,
Is there an option, can you shoot at, for example,
so you can see hummingbird
higher
wings.
resolution at lower FPS?
The option is 120 frames per second or 240 frames per second, or the normal 30, whatever camera phone videos shoot at.
At 120 FPS, is that 1080 or is that still 720?
I believe it's still 720, but I didn't shoot any 120 frame per second. I'm glad that they left the choice. It's kind of an un-Apple-y thing to do. The 240 frame per second video takes a lot of space per second, compared obviously 4 to 8 times as much, depending on what frame rate you know.
And it still does this thing where it can ramp up to the slow motion and also includes their approximation of sound in slow motion.
Yeah, so you can control that. You can control the ramp in the app. I don't think you can see it because I think it's showing just the video on the TV. But you control the ramp by scooching this. You can't. There's no gentle ramp. Like you can't say move this to 120, move this to 240. It's just normal human speed and then slow down to 240 frames a second. Now it's playing on the TV again. But
what about manual control?
So manual control in the camera is actually new and it's quite good. You have one of the things that's noticeable that I immediately noticed in video is that iOS 8 adds the ability to do depth focusing. Okay. So yeah, give me something to hold. So I'm going to focus on this guy, get you in the background. The problem is this camera's huge, right? So I can't, and then I can change the focus by tapping on the part that I want to be in focus, and exposure changes at the same time. You can also get small controls over exposure by swiping up or down once you tap the exposure window. So you can't see that right now, but so there you go. You can move it up and down, and it adjusts the exposure just slightly. If you want to get something that's a little dark, but maybe not in focus separate. I don't know, I can't figure out how to switch separate the exposure and the autofocus, which I believe you're supposed to be able to do. It isn't apparent to me how you do it. One thing I did note with the camera especially, you basically never use the flash. I've had the flash on auto since I got the phone. It's never fired yet. Even when I was shooting a picture of my daughter sitting inside a cardboard box that was really, really dark, it just went for a high grain, a high ISO shot rather than firing the flash, which I think is actually a pretty good choice for them. Okay, so I talked about how you can't actually reach the camera shortcut with your thumb without really doing some crazy stretching. I just can't do it.
It's like it's because iOS, the basic elements like the lock screen were not adjusted between all the phones.
Yeah, it seems like I mean, if they continue selling a 6 Plus, which it seems like they're going to because they've sold a bunch of them, I think we're going to see some major changes either in the next year or with iOS 9 about how the language of the OS shifts from working at the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen.
So things on like Android phones, for example, do a thing where the lock screen and your shortcuts are at the center of the screen.
Right, which makes a ton of sense.
Yep, and you have a radial dial.
Exactly. The lock screen isn't as much of a problem, but like if you look at this window for Safari, all of the stuff that I need to hit and to go forward and back and all that, well, the forward and back's at the bottom, but anything I need to hit to type in a URL is at the top. Now you can double tap the home button and go type your stuff in, but it's a little tedious, and I don't think you're realistically going to do that. And the enter button's on the far right side. So if you look at, again, let's go back to messages, it's good. Like the go back to the list of messages thing is in the top left. So you always are doing this double tap to bring stuff down. It works, it's not really great. It's not a substitute for redesigning the OS to work better one-handed. Third-party app navigation suffers the same problem. All of the stuff in Mail is in the same spot. It's a pretty universal problem with the OS. If you buy the 6 Plus, expect to use it two-handed most of the time. The double tap thing works, but it's kind of sucky. It's not great.
Did it feel slippery at all?
Holding it in your hand one-handed, like when I'm sitting on the couch, I don't ever worry about it. It's a safe place. When I'm on the street and you're kind of getting jostled by people walking along, yeah, I keep a real tight grip if I have it out. And I usually take it out when I'm stopped. I don't like just walk down the street like I would with my 5S with it kind of tucked safely in my hand. It's a big phone. Like it is undeniably a big phone. You're not going to miss that. Couple other things, battery life. The bigger case gives you a lot more space for battery. This phone has, I'm going to look at the numbers because I'm going to mess it up if I don't, a 2,915 milliamp hour battery, which is comparable but a little bit smaller than most of the other large Android phones. I think your OnePlus One is 3,100 milliamp hours. Is that right?
Sure, yeah.
The 6 is an 1,800 milliamp hour.
Wow.
And the 5S is a 1,560 milliamp hour. So
it's a big difference.
There's a pretty wide range here. I had wonderful battery life with the 6 Plus, better than I've had with any new phone to date. Like I used it aggressively like it was a brand new phone and didn't have to charge it from the time I get up at 7 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night.
And to be clear, these numbers are not comparable between platforms. You can't say that. The only thing you compare is, the only thing that number tells you is how efficiently the OS is using the battery.
Right. And of course, iOS 8 has new battery features, so you can go in and actually see what's using your battery. I think that probably sucks for people who use apps that people use all the time, like Tweetbot and stuff like that. When you look at this, it's Tweetbot. I played some double this morning, so that's going to be higher than normal. Basically, this is a list of apps that I use most frequently. The battery life on the 6, not quite as good. Gene and I went out to West Sonoma on Sunday where we had low cell service. You know what happens with your phone where it doesn't see a tower, the radio keeps pinging more frequently, it starts to get warm in your pocket. We were doing stuff that we were shooting a lot more video and taking a lot more photos than normal. And still at the end of all that, at the end of that day, her phone was at about 10% battery life. I was at 30% at the end of the day. So it's not, and that was using GPS and the whole 9 yards. Like heavy use, I'm seeing 20 or 30% of battery left at the end of the day, which is amazing. I mean, it's really good. Haven't done, obviously, we've only had the phones for 2 weeks. So we haven't done any kind of detailed,
long-term
repeatable battery tests. And the drain is, it's going to drain over time, if anything is representative of the past. Okay. Both phones seem to have a little bit of that new iPhone jank that was introduced with the 5S. The camera, sometimes you'll launch the camera and it'll just hang for 30 seconds, 20 seconds, which is not what I've come to expect from iPhones. Third-party apps, for example, Flickr. Let's see, where's Flickr? Flickr's here. When you go into the Flickr app, it's going to ask me if I want to rate them. I don't. Like there's this long pause, you saw the screen flash up for a sec, and there's a white blurb at the bottom where it's scaling up. Wow. It doesn't support the new resolutions yet. So like that stuff will get better over time as people update their apps, but it's something that you should be accustomed, you should expect when you buy a new iPhone close to launch.
Is that so the 6, if you have a 5S, is the 6 something that you should upgrade to?
I don't think you should ever upgrade a phone 1 year to the next.
If you have a 5.
If you have a 5, it's a great upgrade. I know Gary went from a 5 to a 6. Gina went from a 5 to a 6. Both of them have been very, very happy with them. The battery life on the 5 had some well-documented but Apple service problems, so that makes it an easier decision. The one thing I do absolutely love about both of these phones is that the vibration and the ringers are both much louder than on the 5 and the 5S. So the vibration I feel in a jeans pocket every single time. On the 5S, I would frequently miss single hit message notifications and stuff like that. So that's definitely a huge improvement.
And Apple, both the phones now have the power button on the side.
The power button on the side I don't like, and I'll show you why. If you use the volume buttons to take photos, when you're in the camera app, and I can't find the camera app, this is another thing. iOS doesn't sort the icons from the bottom up. It doesn't give you an option to say, make my first icon the bottom left one, and then cascade up from there. It only, on this phone, the bottom left is the most important place. This is where you reach. These are the apps that I use most frequently. The only way for me to force what's here is by filling all these other rows with stuff and then making sure that this ends up being the one that I want, which is super dumb. When I'm in the camera, you squeeze the bottom to take a picture. You also squeeze the power button. So you take a screenshot and a picture at the same time because they're opposite each other's. Volume up and down buttons, which are your shutter buttons, power button, which is obviously not your shutter button. It's not a great solution. It would be much better if these were not opposite each other, where you're going to squeeze naturally when you're holding it like you're taking a photo. Apple Pay isn't turned on yet, so we haven't been able to test that.
Right. But these are the only phones that support it?
These are the only phones that support it. The NFC chip in this phone supposedly is only going to work for Apple Pay, so you won't be able to use it to pair Bluetooth devices and bump your friends and do all the other stuff that people do with NFC on Android. The cases, I went and got a couple of cases the other day just to kind of see what they're like.
These are the Apple native cases.
These are the official Apple cases. I got a leather case for the 6 Plus. It makes it really huge. I'm going to squeeze it in here.
A lot of people feel like they shouldn't use cases because if the selling point is how thin these phones are, then why add bulk to them?
I feel like with the 6 Plus, I feel much safer walking around on the street with a case because the case does have a little bit of a lip on the edge, so you're not going to whack it, and like the angles at which you can hit glass on concrete it would be really hard to do. It makes the phone a lot bigger. It still fits in a jeans front pocket. It's much tighter. The 6 Plus, I got a silicone. The 6 regular, I got a silicone case for. It makes the phone really hard to slide in and out of pockets because it's very tacky. So I don't think I would recommend either of these cases. They're both, I think, a little bit too big. There's probably a better solution from a third party that just hasn't been released yet.
Okay.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
I think that's everything.
Pricing on the 6 is same as it always has been on their new iPhones?
Well, no, not exactly.
It starts at $200.
It starts at $200 for a 16 gig model. The $100 up version at $299 is 64 gigs now instead of 32 gigs.
That's good.
It's good. I wish that $200 version was 32 gigs instead of 16.
Sure.
I think given the high-speed camera, the 8 megapixel photos, the 1080p video, all that stuff, 16 gigs is going to go really fast, even if you don't install a ton of apps. Just looking at the number of photos you get in text messages over the course of 6 months or a year, you can get 2 or 3 gigs there if you have people who are sending you a lot of text images. So iOS does a better job of maintaining that now, but 16 gigs isn't enough. You should look at the 64 gig model, I think, is the base. The Plus is another $100 on top of that.
Wow.
So it starts at $300 and $100 for 64 gigs, another $100 for 128 gigs. If you want to get these off contract, the 16 gig model starts at $649. The 6 Plus 16 gig model is $100 on top of that, so it's $750.
And it's still $100 increments?
$100 increments. The cases, I think the silicone cases are $35 and $40 for 6 and 6 Plus respectively. The leather case is $45 and $50 for 6 and 6 Plus respectively. So it's a $50 leather case, which is a ton of money to spend on an iPhone case. I mean, you could make the argument that you could get that instead of Apple Care if you're going to keep the phone for a while. Yeah. I don't think you're realistically going to use this case for 2 years. It's a big honker of a case. So that's the 6 and the 6 Plus.
Which one are you going to keep?
I don't know. What do you think? What would you keep if you were getting one of these?
I'm not getting one of those. So
But I'm asking you-
I haven't used them, so
In an imaginary world,
I would
where
get the 6 Plus.
you would get the 6 Plus. I think I'm probably going to keep the 6 Plus. Like that's my, like I like the size. The extra battery life is a huge benefit given what we like, the amount that we travel and how much we're out and about. It's so much smaller than the Nexus 5. Like if you look at that compared to the Nexus 5, this is the new Moto X. Beside it, you have a lot of fingerprints on that guy. It's like that Moto X is a really nice size though. I don't know. I honestly, I have no idea where 14 days isn't enough to decide if the big screen is too big. That's the takeaway. So I'm going to stick with it and I'll take the bullet. If it's big, I'll keep it for a year and get something new next year.
All right.
So a ringing endorsement for the 6 Plus, I guess, from me. I think they're both really nice phones. It doesn't seem to be any obvious problems, assuming you're not wearing super hipster jeans and trying to break your phone all the time.
You shouldn't try to break your phone
Don't
all
try
the
to break
time.
your phone. For Test Time Will, I'll see you guys
Norm.
later.
Bye.